Close your eyes, if they aren't already. Let your breath slow, and imagine the muffled sounds of hooves on cobblestone. It's London. The year is 1863. Gas lamps flicker against thick evening fog. A carriage rolls by, its iron wheels rattling. In the street, far off, a church bell chimes the hour. The Thames smells of silt and soot. The city is immense, overcrowded, and restless, but you are merely observing it from the margins, like a quiet ghost slipping between lives long gone. This is a London few modern eyes would recognize. It is not the London of postcards and palaces. It is a divided city, one where wealth and filth, grandeur and deprivation exist just streets apart. In the east, the air tastes of coal, smoke, and sweat. In the west, the perfume of lilies and expensive hair oil wafts through drawing rooms. But we will begin our journey not among the parlors of the elite, but in the cramped, crumbling belly of the slum. Tonight, we'll walk slowly through those narrow alleys. We'll step inside homes where generations shared a single room, where water was drawn from a public pump, and the threat of hunger lingered like mildew on every wall. We'll trace the lives of women and children working themselves raw and meet quiet revolutionaries who tried to measure and mend the misery. We'll visit the buried bones of old East London, unearthing artifacts that speak of hardship, resilience, and forgotten dignity. And finally, we'll glance westward, toward the chandelier-lit mansions of Mayfair, where the wine was French, and the carpets Persian, and the poor remained conveniently invisible. So let your breath slow further. Let your mind settle gently into the cobbled rhythm of another time. We begin now with the daily grind, the sights, smells, and struggle, love life in a Victorian slum. Let us return to London. The year is 1863. The city is enormous, heaving, breathing, and unceasing. You are in the East End now. Whitechapel, to be precise. The fog sits low and damp, and the day has barely begun. You are not a visitor. This is your home. Not a house knot in the way most people today would imagine. This is a single room, a small one, perhaps 10 feet wide. A few paces from the front to the back wall, if you're lucky. This is where you live. You, your mother, and father, your younger brother and sister, a cousin, an aging grandmother who coughs through the night, sometimes an infant or two, depending on the season, depending on survival. The room serves as bedroom, dining room, nursery, sick room, and storage. The air is thick, not warm, exactly, but close and clinging. The plaster is cracking from the walls, and cold radiates upward from the floor, which creaks when you shift your weight. You share your sleeping space with mice, sometimes with bed bugs, on better nights, with only each other. You sleep wherever you can, on the floor, on rags, sometimes on a second-hand straw mattress, its contents flattened and sour-smelling from years of use and rain. Pillows are rare, blankets thinner still. You are woken before the light. The cry of a neighbor's baby leaks through the wooden walls. You can hear the scuff of boots overhead, someone already on their way to the docks. Somewhere nearby, a door slams. In these buildings, everything echoes. Footsteps, coughing, shouting, even laughter all blend into a constant thrum of human sound, loud, tired, unrelenting. Your clothes are where you left them, on the chair, or the wall hook, or the end of your makeshift bed. They're damp from yesterday's rain, still not quite dry. You pull them on, layer by layer, whether they're clean or not. There's no time or means for washing unless your mother has boiled water the night before. Your boots, if you have any, are stiff. The soles have long worn thin, patched with bits of cloth or paper, stuffed to muffle the wet. They are heavy when you walk, but better than going barefoot. For many, bare feet are the only option. Breakfast, there may be something. A crust of bread, a spoonful of gruel if you've saved enough for oats. The bread might be yesterday's or the day before that. If it's gone mouldy, you pick around the worst bits. Everyone does. A mug of weak tea might be shared among you all, each person sipping, passing it back with quiet gratitude. If there's meat, it's a rarity. If there's milk, it might be watered down. If there's butter, it is a holiday. Food is never certain. Sometimes you eat something and hope it doesn't make you sick. Sometimes you eat something and already know it will. Clean water is also no guarantee. If you're lucky, you live near a pump that runs clear. But even the clearest water can carry cholera. You know this. People have died. You've seen them. Bodies wrapped in rags, carried from rooms not so different from your own. But the thirst wins out. You drink, everyone drinks. By now, the sun has started to rise softly, vaguely, behind the grey soot that passes for a sky in this part of the city. Outside your home, the street is already alive. You hear it before you see it. The clang of carts rolling over cobblestones, the barking of a dog, a woman shouting at her son to get up, a child calling out matches, matches, trying to sell to the few passers-by. A man hawks roasted chestnuts. The scent is tempting, even through the reek of rotten ashdot. You make your way into the lane. It's not really a road, just a narrow passage between crumbling buildings. The puddles here are permanent. They smell of refuse and waste. At least once a day, someone empties a chamber pot out the window. You learn to look up, always, just in case. If your family can afford rent, it eats up half or more of your income. If not, you squat, crowding into a corner of someone else's room, paying in kind, or in favors, or with silence. The landlord may not live anywhere near here. Most don't. They collect the coins each week, sometimes with threats, sometimes with a polite note. Repairs are rare. Windows are broken and never replaced. Floorboards give way and are patched with boards, or nothing at all. Leaks drip from ceilings, cold wind whistles through gaps in brick. If you live near a tannery or a soapworks, the air stings your eyes as soon as you step outside. Industrial waste runs into gutters. You pass heaps of ash, spoiled cabbage leaves, the bony remains of a dog. Children pick through the garbage looking for rags to sell, or coal chips to gather. And now you work. You might be 10 years old, already hardened by labor, or a mother of 4 with a baby tied to your back while you scrub another family's floors, or a father hunched from lifting sacks of lime, hoping for steady hours. Jobs are inconsistent. Wages are low. Competition is fierce. If you are a day laborer, you line up at dawn with dozens of others. If you're not chosen, you go home. No money, no food. You try again tomorrow. Factories are crowded. The air inside them is as thick as the fog outside. Machines whir and slam. Accidents are common. Fingers are lost. Backs are bent before middle age. And the bosses do not care. Some women make a few pennies a day as seamstresses, working for hours on end by candlelight. Others wash laundry for the wealthy, boiling linens in open cauldrons, their arms red and scalded from steam and soap. Some walk the streets at night. their only option being to sell what little they have left. Lunch is not a break, it's a pause. Maybe a biscuit, maybe a heel of bread. Then it's back to work. You work until your muscles tremble, your head swims, your stomach curls with hunger or exhaustion. Then, finally, you return. It's evening now. The light has faded. The streets smell sharper, fouler. Someone has been sick in the gutter. Someone else is singing, half drunk. A baby cries without stopping. Inside, it's crowded. Your siblings fight for the warmest corner. Your mother peels a potato, the only food left in the house. Maybe there will be a stew. Maybe not. The candles are low. Oil costs money. You try not to cough. You try not to hear the man downstairs shouting at his wife. You try not to listen as your father mutters about losing his job. You try to sleep, even as mice scratch inside the walls and someone stomps overhead. The entire building feels like it is groaning with the weight of poverty. Outside your door, everything is damp, cellars flood, roofs leak, walls crumble, and yet people endure. Somehow, through the filth and the fear and the never-ending noise, people live. They marry, they sing, they play fiddle in the street. They laugh at jokes, even if they've been told 100 times. A neighbor might bring you soup. A stranger might help you up after a fall. Children find ways to chase one another through the alleys, shrieking with delight, their joy a strange defiance. And so you lie down again, on the floor, or the mattress, or a pile of rags. As night settles like a blanket over the rooftops of East London, you hope the rats stay away tonight. You hope the landlord forgets the rent. You hope the baby doesn't cough too hard, and you hope most of all that tomorrow might be a little better, just a little. The world outside the slum tenement is one of motion and machinery, but inside, behind closed doors, another kind of labor unfolds, quiet, invisible, and relentless. The work of women, the work of children, the kind of toil that never earns. Applause rarely draws attention and is almost always unpaid or underpaid. It is early morning again, the kind of morning where the frost has crept in through the cracks in the walls. You can see your breath as you stir from sleep. There's no time to lie still, no time for reflection or peace. The day has already begun. You are 10 years old, perhaps 11. Your fingers are already calloused, your back already hunched from hunching. You sit cross-legged on the floor with a pile of shirtwaists next to you. Your task, to sew on buttons. Hundreds of them, one after another after another. It pays a penny per dozen. That's 12 buttons for a single penny. And if you drop one, if your stitches are crooked or uneven, the overseer deducts it. Sometimes he throws your work back at you, demands you begin again. You work by candlelight or near the single dirty window. Your mother has moved the table closer to the light. Candles cost money. You squint through the thread, your eyes already stinging from strain. Sometimes the needle slips. You bleed. You don't stop. There's a cold pot of tea from the night before. No milk, no sugar, just enough warmth to trick your stomach into thinking you've eaten. Your mother is already on her knees. She scrubs floors in other people's houses 3 days a week when the work is steady. But on other days, she takes in laundry. The process begins early. A copper pot must be filled. Water fetched from the street pump, carried up the stairs, bucket by bucket. Then it must be heated over a fire, which costs coal. The soap is coarse. It burns her hands. The linens are soaked, scrubbed on a wooden board, rinsed, wrung out, and hung wherever there's space. Lines strung across the room. Over the bed, Near the fire, they drip into the floorboards. On some days, the steam fogs up the room so thickly you can barely see your own feet. The children cough, their chests wet from the damp dot. This is domestic industry, done from home, unseen and unpaid until delivery. If you return the laundry too late, or not white enough, or not pressed just so you lose the job, you're marked as unreliable. Out in the alleys and courtyards, girls your age sell flowers or matches. They carry trays strapped around their necks, calling to strangers, hoping for pennies. Some shine boots, some sing. If you're lucky enough to be hired into a dressmaking shop, you might join 20 or 30 other girls, packed elbow to elbow on wooden benches. The supervisor walks behind you. The room is silent except for the scrape of scissors and the quiet clatter of needles on buttons. You sew dresses you will never wear, silk and velvet for women who have never thought of you. Sometimes the fabric is worth more than your family's annual income. The days are long, 14 hours, sometimes more. There are no breaks, no protections. If you stop working to rest, to breathe, to stretch your aching fingers, you may be told to leave. In the matchstick factories, the air is thick with phosphorus, white phosphorus, the dangerous kind. The fumes rot your teeth. A disease called phossy jaw creeps into your gums, turns your bones to dust. You know girls who've had their jaws removed. You've seen the pus, the swelling. You've smelled the rot. But it's a job, and it pays. For boys, there is other work. Chimney sweeping, mudlarking, selling newspapers, pulling carts. Chimney sweeps are smaller is better. The tighter the flue, the younger the boy. 6 years old, maybe 7. They are lowered into chimneys to scrape soot from the walls with their bare hands. The soot gets in their lungs, in their eyes, under their fingernails. Some suffocate, some fall. Some get stuck and are never seen again. Mudlarks wade through the Thames at low tide, searching for nails, bits of rope, coins, bones, scraps, anything to sell. They come home soaked, freezing and stinking. The water is black with sewage. Disease lingers in every tide pool, and yet the river gives, sometimes, a spoon, a shoe buckle, a rusted key. These are treasures. At the rag warehouses, girls pick through piles of filth-used cloth, bloodied bandages, old curtains, anything that can be shredded for paper or cleaning rags. The smell is unbearable. The dust chokes the lungs. There are no gloves, no masks, only skirts pulled up to cover your mouth as you work. Home. Even when the workday ends, the labor doesn't stop. You fetch water, you tend to younger siblings. You peel potatoes, if there are any. You help with laundry, soothe the sick, sweep the floor, patch holes in the roof with newspaper. You mend clothes that are already more patched than fabric. Many women work as charwomen, cleaning other people's homes by the hour, always on foot, sometimes walking miles between houses. Their own homes remain in disrepair while they scrub someone else's fireplace. Others hawk goods on the streets, shrimp, watercress, lavender bundles, or pins. They shout until they're hoarse. They fight for corners with other sellers. They keep one eye on the constable because hawking without a license means a fine they cannot pay. Widows are particularly vulnerable. If their husbands died at sea or in the factory, they may have no income at all. Some enter the workhouse. Others rent out the floor of their room to lodger strangers who sleep alongside their children. Some women resort to prostitution not always by choice. sometimes by degrees. You sell matches during the day, then maybe you stay out later, longer, and accept what's offered. The law does not protect you, neither do the police, and if you're caught, there is prison. Or worse, mothers grieve silently, stoically, behind closed doors. Their children fall ill, diphtheria, scarlet fever, croup. There are no doctors for the poor unless you find a charity hospital. Even then, you may be turned away. A doctor's visit costs £1. That's a week's food. And when a child dies, so many do you wrap them in cloth. If you cannot afford a coffin, you bury them in a drawer, lined with cotton, under cover of night. There is no time to mourn properly. There is still laundry to be done. Illness is a luxury. To be sick means to stop working, and to stop working means to starve. So you do not stop. You keep sewing, even as your eyes blur. You keep scrubbing, even as your back cramps. You keep selling, even as your shoes fall apart. The home is not a refuge. It is a workplace, a factory, a hospital, a grave. But amid the darkness, there is resilience. Women form laundry clubs to pool money for coal. They create mutual aid groups. They gather at the pump and exchange news, advice, sometimes even laughter. Girls share needles and buttons. Mothers share remedies. Widows share stories. Older children care for younger ones. Girls plait one another's hair with bits of ribbon. Boys fashion marbles from buttons and play in the alley, kicking at shadows, laughing louder than the hunger in their bellies. The work is hard. It never ends. But it is the work that keeps families alive, and yet almost no one records it. Paintings hang in galleries showing these women. No statues are raised to these children. Their names vanish from history books. Their labor is considered ordinary, unworthy of memory. But it was their hands that sewed the empire's garments, their backs that bent beneath its wealth. Their labor, invisible though it was, held up the very city that ignored them. They didn't build monuments, they built meals. From nothing, they built hope from soot. They built dignity in the most undignified places. And so, behind the closed doors of tenements and alleyways, a different kind of strength lived, a quiet, persistent courage that history too often forgot. Imagine a man walking the streets of Victorian London, not hurried like the bankers on Lombard Street, nor flamboyant like the gentlemen of Pall Mall. He is quiet, unassuming. He carries a notebook, not a cane. His name is Charles Booth, and he is here not to pass judgment or collect rents. He is here to listen, to observe, to map what others pretend not to see. This is London in the 1880s, the world's largest city, the heart of an empire. On its surface, it glitters steam engines, shop windows, imperial parades. But Booth suspects something lies beneath the surface, something darker, something ignored. He is not a politician, not a priest. He is, curiously, a businessman, a successful one at that. His fortune was made in shipping, in commerce. He could have retired to a quiet life of comfort. But something gnaws at him, the growing conversation around poverty in England at the time. Many believed poverty was a moral failing. The poor were poor, it was said, because they were lazy, or criminal, or weak. Clergymen preached that charity should be conditional. Politicians warned that aiding the poor would breed dependence. Booth disagreed, but he needed evidence, so he set out to gather it. He began with a question: how many people in London truly lived in poverty? Existing estimates, including those from government officials, claimed that about 25% of the population lived below the poverty line. Booth found this suspiciously low. So, with the precision of an accountant and the patience of a monk, he began to build a study. It was not a survey in the modern sense. It was an investigation, deep, methodical, and often dangerous. Booth assembled a team, not just clerks, but people who knew the city intimately. Some were police officers, others were school inspectors, social workers, local clergy, anyone who walked the neighborhoods daily. These investigators were sent, street by street, into every corner of London, from the sunlit squares of Kensington to the deepest alleys of Whitechapel. They observed homes, they interviewed families, they recorded incomes, occupations, living conditions, and even moral reputations. What emerged was not merely a table of data. It was something far more haunting. A color-coded map of London, showing in stark detail who lived whereon, how dot streets were shaded according to class. Yellow for the wealthy upper middle class, pink for the fairly comfortable. Blue and black marked the working poor and the destitute. The most chilling label, streets marked semi-criminal and vicious. You can still look at these maps today, and if you trace your finger across them, you'll feel the boundaries not just of class, but of fate. One street might be home to clerks and teachers. Turn the corner, and you're in a slum of dock labourers and child matchmakers. London, Booth revealed, was not one city. It was many cities, stacked beside each other, touching but never mixing. Booth's team recorded astonishing details. How many families lived per room? How many children went to school? How often wages were withheld? They noted when a mother took in sewing, when a father drank his wages, when a child died of the measles. It was an act of witnessing, silent, sober, unflinching. He did not stop with one report. Booth's study grew into 17 volumes, published over nearly 2 decades between 1889 and 1903. It was called Life and Labour of the People in London. It took over 20 years of his life. Volume after volume, he painted a portrait of a city balanced on a knife's edge. He showed that poverty was not the result of idleness, but of wages too low to survive, of work too dangerous, of housing too crowded, of illness untreated, of children sent to earn before they could write their names. Booth's work offered no easy answers. He did not call for revolution. He was not a radical. In fact, in many ways, he remained a Victorian gentleman, reserved, deeply moral. But his data made change unavoidable. No one could look at his maps and pretend poverty was invisible. His work influenced many who followed: politicians, social reformers, educators. His maps were consulted by urban planners, used in parliamentary debates, and whispered about in drawing rooms where poverty had once been a distant rumor. One of Booth's greatest impacts was on the concept of the poverty line. His study redefined it not just in financial terms, but as a complex intersection of housing, health, family structure, and opportunity. And yet, Charles Booth never became a household name. He didn't seek fame. He did not command crowds or write fiery speeches. He simply observed, recorded, mapped. In a city that rushed past the poor, Booth paused. He saw them, counted them, documented them. In doing so, he gave them what they had long been denied: visibility. He continued his work into the early 1900s. Even as he aged, his notebooks remained beside him. When his health declined, he still edited reports from bed. He died in 1916, quietly, In a world already at war, history often forgets men like Booth, not because they failed, but because their success was too quiet to shout. His maps are still studied today, digitized, analyzed, and revered by urban historians and sociologists alike. They are time capsules, windows into a London before reform, before social security, before the welfare state. What Booth did with pencil and paper in the gaslit streets of 1880s London, we now attempt with satellites and algorithms. But few modern projects have the moral clarity of his work, because beneath the data, the maps, the ink what Charles Booth truly drew was dignity. For the labourer with no shoes, for the widow sharing one room with 5 children, for the girl sewing buttons by candlelight, he proved they mattered, that their lives could be known, measured, mapped, remembered, and in a time when poverty was either blamed or ignored. That act alone was revolutionary. So now, more than a century later, as we drift past old slum buildings and modern flats past riverside developments built atop forgotten alleyways, Charles Booth's legacy whispers from beneath our feet. Each time we ask, who is being left behind? Who do we fail to see? We walk, unknowingly, in his quiet, determined footsteps in the quiet hours of the early morning. Long after the carts have rolled away and the gas lamps have flickered out, the streets of Whitechapel lie still. What once was bustling with life and clamour now rests beneath layers of dust, concrete, and time. And yet the ground remembers, beneath modern pavements, behind glass skyscrapers and renovated flats, lies a forgotten world. Not one of palaces or monuments, but of chamber pots, soot, bones, and buttons. A world of the mundane and the utterly human. This is where archaeology comes in, not the kind that unearths golden tombs or grand temples, but the quiet kind. The kind that gently brushes away centuries of soot to reveal the lives of the invisible, the poor, the forgotten, the ones history often passed by without a second glance. Welcome to Whitechapel, London's infamous East End, once a teeming network of slums, courts, and alleyways, now transformed, gentrified, and in places almost unrecognizable. But when developers dig, archaeologists follow, and what they find is astonishing. Take, for example, the excavation at the site of the old Whitechapel Bell Foundry, one of the oldest manufacturing sites in London, active since the 1500s, when redevelopment plans were approved in the 2010s. Archaeological teams moved in to investigate. What they discovered was not just industrial equipment or casting molds, but layers of Victorian domestic life beneath the foundations, beneath the brick walls and wooden floors. They unearthed private outdoor toilets that, thanks to the habits of the time, doubled as refuse pits. People threw all manner of waste into them: broken crockery, shoes, bones, buttons, hairpins, and food scraps. To us, they may seem like garbage, but to the archaeologist, they are a diary, a time capsule of survival. Take the pottery, for instance. In one small pit behind a demolished tenement house, they found dozens of mismatched plate-steeped transferware, often chipped or cracked, reused far past its lifespan. Some were local, others had travelled across oceans. A mug with an American eagle, a cup made in Staffordshire. These fragments whisper stories of trade, of market stalls, of small pleasures. A cup of tea, a bowl of porridge, a child's birthday treat. Then there were toothbrushes with pig bristles still faintly visible. Not everyone in the slums owned a toothbrush. To find one is a clue that someone, in a sea of neglect, still tried to maintain dignity, to clean themselves, to be presentable, even as the rats ran underfoot in the same layer. They found a broken doll's head, ceramic, once hand-painted with blue eyes and rose-colored lips. It likely belonged to a child who played near the fire or on the tenement stoop. The doll, even in its brokenness, was cared for. Its head was hollow, suggesting it was once part of a larger, stuffed body, maybe passed from one sibling to the next, lost during a move, or dropped during a fire. Nearby, a lace-up leather boot, child-sized, worn through at the heel, but with careful stitching repairs. The kind of item a mother would mend over and over again, rather than replace. The leather cracked and stiff with age, but still holding shape, as if waiting for the child who once ran in it to come home. And among these artifacts, bones, animal and human, lamb bones, some still bearing butchery marks, indicating what was eaten, often nothing more than soup bones, reused until marrow gave out. Rats, sometimes. Evidence of how hunger shaped diet. In one trench, a set of human teeth, likely from a grave disturbed by earlier construction. The teeth were worn flat from years of chewing coarse bread and grit common in flour adulterated with chalk. No signs of dental care. One had a dark, gaping cavity. These are not sensational discoveries. There are no gold coins, no treasure chests, but there is something deeper, truth. Archaeologists also found fragments of slate, etched with scratch marks possibly used by children learning to write. A piece of chalk, a broken slate pencil. These tiny details speak of aspiration. Even amid poverty, children tried to learn. Parents tried to teach. Perhaps a girl crouched on the doorstep, tracing letters while her mother washed clothes. Perhaps a boy copied words overheard from a street preacher. Elsewhere, remains of tin toys, a spinning top, a rusted music box, crushed under time, but still singing of joy, of play. And the housing itself, what's left of it, reveals volumes. The foundations of two-room homes that once housed 10 or more people. Narrow staircases so steep they had to be climbed sideways. Fireplaces blackened with soot. No insulation, no indoor plumbing. Latrines shared by dozens. Water fetched from pumps to streets over. Drainage trenches show signs of failure. Overflow. The smell, archaeologists noted, would have been appalling. But they also found signs of human effort. Hand-cut drainage bricks, lime sprinkled to fight the stench. Attempts, however feeble, to hold back disease, and disease did come. Medical archaeologists examined burials from nearby pauper cemeteries. The bones of slum dwellers tell a story of malnutrition. Children with stunted growth, adults with curved spines, old injuries never healed, rickets, scurvy, and tuberculosis in one female skeleton. Perhaps 25 years old, the pelvis showed signs of multiple births. The knees eroded from squatting, the teeth worn. She had lived, worked, birthed, and died young. We do not know her name, but the ground remembers her. Some of the most poignant finds come from sites near Spitalfields Market, where housing once stood shoulder to shoulder with warehouses and breweries. In a preserved tenement basement, researchers uncovered a stash of carefully folded paper layers of newsprint used as insulation between walls. The dates spanned several years. The articles, faded but readable, included an advertisement for penny-a-line poetry, a notice for lost pets, and a report on Queen Victoria's Jubilee. Even the walls spoke. Graffiti scratched into plaster, initials, tally marks, a crude drawing of a sailing ship, perhaps carved by a child dreaming of the sea, or a man remembering home, and in the shadows of the past, amid the coal dust and brick rubble, archaeologists find stories of women, especially women. Some wore hairpins that remain in the dirt, rusted but still curved. One archaeologist found a perfume bottle, still sealed, with the faintest floral scent inside. A luxury, a treasure, likely purchased second-hand or salvaged, worn for a special occasion, a funeral, perhaps, or a rare night at the music hall. The scent lingered, even after the woman was gone. Not every find is grim. Some are defiantly joyful. A pipe bowl shaped like a lion, a brooch with colored glass, a comb broken but still bearing traces of someone's hair, a tin spoon engraved with a name, Elsie. Each object is a testament to human resilience. Modern archaeologists often speak of the archaeology of the ordinary, and in places like Whitechapel, it is anything but ordinary. Every boot heel, every bead, every bone tells a story that no official record could capture. The censuses recorded names and occupations, but they never captured the smell of cooking fish in the alley, the clatter of boots on cobblestones, the way a mother tucked her child into a bed made of crates, the soft hush of whispered prayers before sleep. Archaeology does. It captures not just what people had, but what they held on to. Not just what they lost, but what they tried to save. A broken mirror, a chipped plate, a handkerchief with initials stitched into the corner. These artifacts rest now in museum drawers and display cases, labeled, catalogued. But when the lights go off and the halls fall silent, their stories do not sleep. They whisper still that life in a Victorian slum was not just hardship and horror, but also endurance, care, small comforts, fleeting joys. And now, more than a century later, beneath the gentrified pubs and luxury flats, those stories wait for someone to listen again. You. Perhaps as you drift gently into dreams. While the narrow alleys of Whitechapel overflowed with soot and sewage, another London existed just a carriage ride away, a world of velvet carpets, gaslight chandeliers, and servants who padded silently through hallways longer than city blocks. It was the London of Belgravia, Mayfair, Kensington, the neighborhoods where fog was poetic, not choking, where the clatter of hoofbeats on cobbles signaled not laborers hurrying to dock work, but high society ladies on their way to the opera. Let us step now into that other London, the world of the Victorian elite. It is evening. A maid trims the wick of a crystal lamp in a drawing room filled with damask wallpaper and the faint scent of beeswax polish. A footman carries in a silver tray of letters, calling cards, invitations, political news. Upstairs, a gentleman loosens his cravat and settles into a leather armchair beside a roaring fire. He has not walked far today. His boots are polished not from use, but from polish itself. In a house like this, there are more rooms than people. There is a morning room, a music room, a withdrawing room, a library filled with leather-bound books that, in some homes, no one has read. There are cellars stocked with French wines, and pantries lined with tea tins and sugar loaves from the Caribbean in the bedrooms. Feather mattresses rest atop carved four-poster beds, silk counterpanes, linen sheets washed and aired daily by laundresses who live in the attics, barely paid, barely spoken to. The elite sleep soundly, not just because their beds are soft, but because the world they live in has been padded for them. Here, there is hot water drawn in copper tubs by servants who rise before dawn. There are flush toilets, rare even by late-century standards. In some of the wealthiest houses, gas lighting is replaced with early electricity. Light at the flick of a switch. Imagine. Breakfast is not rushed. A butler oversees the table with military precision. Toast racks, silver egg cups, porridge served in china bowls warmed beforehand. The master of the house may read the Times, freshly ironed so as not to smudge his fingers. His wife, if not supervising the housekeeper, may be consulting with her dressmaker about fabrics from Paris. Their daughter writes a note in perfect copperplate script, perhaps confirming her attendance at Lady M. SMUSICAL. And what of the servants? There are many. A house of this size employs a butler, footman, housemaids, a cook, a scullery maid, a lady's maid, a valet, and sometimes a coachman and gardener. They work from before sunrise to well after midnight. They move like shadows, trained to be invisible. When they do speak, it is quietly, deferentially. They do not sit unless allowed. They do not enter without knocking. Their beds are narrow, straw-filled, creaking with each turn. They eat scraps, cold mutton, gruel, tea, if lucky. Yet in the world of the elite, the staff are an extension of the home's reputation. Well-dressed servants imply wealth. A footman in livery is not only a helper. He is a symbol, gleaming in gold trim, standing behind the lady's chair like a chess piece waiting to be moved. And what of leisure? For the elite, leisure was not a break from work, it was a sign of superiority. The middle class toiled for promotions and pensions. The poor labored for bread. But the upper crust curated a life of elegant idleness. Mornings were for correspondence, horseback rides, or lessons in music and French for the young ladies. Afternoons might include visits to dressmakers, tailors, or charitable institutions. Orphanage, perhaps, or a soup kitchen where fashionable ladies could display their benevolence, if only briefly. Evenings were the apex of society. Dinners began at 8 or later. Multiple courses. Turtle soup, venison, partridge, jellies moulded in the shapes of towers, champagne served in delicate flutes, conversation rehearsed like a play. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room for gossip and pianoforte. The gentlemen remained for port and politics. In these rooms, deals were struck, marriages arranged, fortunes sustained. The economy of empire ran not only on steam and steel, but on whispered agreements over decanters and cigars. The theatre was another domain of the elite, not just as entertainment, but as spectacle. Boxes at the Royal Opera House or Drury Lane were rented not for the play itself, but for being seen. A diamond necklace could speak volumes. A glance across the stalls could ruin a reputation or spark an engagement. Then there were the houses themselves. To visit a mansion in Belgrave Square was to step into a world where nothing was accidental. Floors were polished until one could see one's face in them. Curtains imported. Carpets hand-woven. Even the smell was curated rose water, lavender, beeswax. Servants placed pots of violets near windows to catch the breeze. Walls were lined with oil paintings, family portraits, mythological scenes, hunting tablets, a display of lineage and taste. Bookshelves, even if rarely read, were chosen with care. Gilt titles, Latin spines, first editions. The bedrooms were sanctuaries. Women had dressing tables filled with ivory combs, powder puffs, silver scent bottles. Men had shaving stands, watch chains, cufflinks. Their clothes were tailored. Shoes shined by others, And yet, for all their comfort, the elite were obsessed with appearances. A single stain on a glove, a wrinkle in a dress, an out-of-place word, these things could unravel social standing faster than a scandal. Reputation was currency. Cleanliness, order, decorum, these were not virtues but necessities. To preserve this lifestyle, enormous wealth was required. But wealth alone was not enough. Old money mattered more than new, titles more than bank accounts. And so even the rich played a dangerous game, masking debt, marrying for advantage, maintaining illusions. Meanwhile, outside the great iron gates and polished brass knockers, the world changed. Riots, reforms, cholera outbreaks. But inside these homes, it was always 1857, always time for tea. The disconnect was profound. While a mother in Shoreditch buried her 5th child from diphtheria, a woman in Mayfair discussed the latest Paris fashion. While a family of 8 huddled in one room, a gentleman paced the length of his billiards room alone. Yet there were intersections. A housemaid from Shoreditch might be polishing silver in Mayfair. A footman's brother might load cargo on the docks. The slums and salons were not separate planets, they were 2 sides of the same coin. And often, the comfort of one was built upon the labor of the other. Some elites were aware. They funded schools, visited hospitals, wrote books on morality. Queen Victoria herself expressed sympathy for the poor, though from a distance. Behind lace curtains and marble pillars, others preferred not to see. They passed slums enclosed, carriages, the windows curtained. They hired and fired staff without learning their names. They read about crime in the East End and shuddered, never realizing their discarded corsets and broken china ended up in those very alleyways. But comfort is a kind of blindness, and the houses of the elite, warm, silent, golden, were cocoons against the storm outside. So let us stand for a moment in one of those drawing rooms. The fire crackles. A clock ticks gently on the mantel. A lady in silk turns the pages of a novel. Her child sleeps upstairs, under a wool blanket embroidered with initials. The only sound is the hush of velvet curtains drawn against the night. She cannot hear the coughing from the alley beyond the garden wall. She does not smell the coal smoke thick in the east wind. She does not know that just 4 streets away, a girl her daughter's age shares a mattress with 3 siblings and a dying grandmother. The walls are thick, the rugs are deep, the silver shines, and outside, London breathes. By the mid to late 19th century, the suffering in London's slums had reached such magnitude that even the most well-insulated hearts of the upper classes could no longer entirely ignore it. Smoke, sewage, and sorrow had permeated the very walls of empire. Cholera crept westward. Strikes disrupted commerce. Riots cracked open the illusion of order. Something had to change, not necessarily out of compassion, but increasingly out of necessity. And so began the long, uneven, and often compromised process of slum reformer. Slow-moving, sometimes patronizing, sometimes inspired attempt to confront what many Victorians had long pretended not to see. This is a story not only of ideas and buildings, but of people, quiet, meticulous reformers who believed that cities could be better designed, engineers who dreamt of cleaner air and safer streets, social workers who walked into tenements not as tourists, but as listeners. Let us begin with one such figure, Octavia. She was not a politician nor a noblewoman, but a social reformer driven by principle and practice. Born in 1838 to a family of modest means, Hill believed that good housing was not a luxury, but a moral right. Yet she rejected the idea of blind charity. Her approach was different. Not to give handouts, but to teach responsibility through dignity. Hill began by taking over the management of a few run-down tenements in Marylebone. She personally visited tenants, ensured repairs were made, and collected rent weekly. But more than that, she built relationships. She knew her tenants' names, their needs, their fears. She encouraged cleanliness, punctuality, savings from a lofty distance, but from within arm's reach. She trained other women as rent collectors, not merely as administrators, but as early social workers. Hill's buildings were simple but thoughtfully maintained. Courtyards were cleaned, windows were mended. She insisted on fresh air and open space pocket gardens where possible. Children needed sunlight, she argued. Mothers needed hope. Her approach influenced early housing associations and inspired the broader model dwellings movement, a wave of attempts to replace chaotic, unsafe slums with orderly, morally uplifting housing. One of the most prominent examples was the Peabody Trust, founded by American banker George Peabody. In the 1860s, the trust began constructing red brick tenement blocks with proper drainage, shared courtyards, and controlled rents. These buildings, uniform, austere, and clean, were a marked departure from the squalor of old. But they were not without problems. Eligibility requirements were strict. Tenants had to demonstrate cleanliness, stable employment, and moral behavior. Those most in need, the sick, the unemployed, the undeserving, were often excluded. The very people who needed housing the most found themselves shut out by rules meant to uplift them still. The movement gained momentum. The Artisans, Labourers, and General Dwellings Company, founded in 1867, constructed entire estates rows of modest terraced houses for the working poor. Rents were controlled. Homes had small gardens. Water was clean. Privacy was possible. It was not luxury, but it was progress. Alongside these private efforts, some reformers turned to policy and infrastructure. Enter Joseph Bazalgette, chief engineer of London's Metropolitan Board of Works. After the Great Stink of 1858, when the Thames reeked so badly that even Parliament had to halt its sessions, Bazalgette oversaw the creation of London's modern sewer system. It was one of the greatest public health achievements of the 19th century. Bazalgette's massive, underground tunnels redirected waste away from the river, dramatically reducing cholera outbreaks and transforming urban hygiene. It was engineering, a salvation, and yet the slums above remained. Public health acts passed in the 1840s, and again in the 1870s, gave local authorities power to condemn unsafe housing. Yet enforcement was spotty, and landlords found loopholes. A slum might be declared uninhabitably for the tenants to be evicted and the building quietly relet, unchanged, the next day, and even when demolitions were enforced, the consequences were complicated. Let us pause here. Picture a street in dozens of families live in collapsing tenements. Walls are damp with mold. Staircases sag like rotting teeth. One day, the city posts a notice. Building condemned. Clearance in 30 days. Some celebrate, others panic. Where will they go? There are no new flats waiting, no safety net. Often families moved just a few streets away into other overcrowded rooms, creating slums in new places. Clearance, in many cases, simply displaced poverty. It did not end it. Moreover, slum clearance often became a tool for profit-driven redevelopment. In the name of progress, Developers raised entire neighborhoods, replacing them with wide boulevards, shops, and offices. Railway companies tore through working-class districts, laying track where homes once stood. The Metropolitan Railway displaced thousands. New stations rose. Families vanished. These were not tragedies recorded in history books. No bronze plaques marked their homes. The poor were, by and large, invisible, even when they were moved for projects meant to help them. Still, some victories emerged. By the end of the 19th century, urban planning was no longer a fringe concept. Reformers advocated for open space, zoning laws, and tenant rights. Public parks were created to give poor children air and sunlight. New housing acts introduced building codes requiring proper ventilation, safe staircases, fire escapes. The seeds of the 20th century welfare state were planted here in these Victorian efforts. But the road was long, and always tension simmered between help and control, between uplift and judgment, between genuine reform and economic convenience. Even those with the best intentions often saw the poor not as neighbors, but as problems to be managed. Let us return now to Octavia Hill. In her old age, she refused to let government take over housing reform. She feared bureaucracy, feared it would lose the human touch. But the problems had grown too large. Her hands, compassionate though they were, could not fix an empire-wide crisis. By the dawn of the 20th century, new tools emerged: state pensions, subsidized housing, the first cracks in the Victorian mindset that poverty was always the fault of the poor. And yet, the legacy of those early reformers lingers in red brick flats, still standing, in the parks that dot London's map, in the simple idea that everyone deserves shelter, not just the fortunate few. London is a city built in layers. Beneath every cobblestone street, behind every Victorian facade, beneath the glossy surfaces of modern glass towers, lie remnants, tiny fragments of lives once lived, whispered stories barely held together by time and dust. The history of the Victorian slums is not only written in books and newspapers, it is buried in soil, in cellars, in forgotten alleys and abandoned privies. And in recent decades, archaeologists have been slowly, painstakingly, listening to the silence. This segment is not about famous names or gilded buildings. It is about buttons and broken plates, infant bones beneath floorboards, scratched initials on bricks, and the archaeology of those for whom the historical record rarely speaks. We begin with an empty lot in Whitechapel, a construction crew preparing the foundations for a new apartment block, uncovers something unexpected: a cluster of Victorian brick walls, long lost to city planning. A few meters down, the remains of an outhouse, its pit filled not only with the remnants of human waste, but with glass bottles, clay tobacco pipes, shoe soles, and the occasional toothbrush, its bristles long gone, its handle worn smooth. To the untrained eye, this might seem like trash, but to urban archaeologists, it is treasure, a midden of daily life, preserved in filth and secrecy. What people discard tells us more than what they save. Consider the toothbrush. Most toothbrushes in the 19th century were made from bone of cow. Bonand had natural bristles, sometimes from boar or horsehair. A toothbrush found in a tenement cesspit is not just an object, it is a clue. Someone, likely poor, took the time and care to clean their teeth. Hygiene mattered, even when society assumed the poor were dirty. This toothbrush, buried for over a century, speaks against stereotype. Then there are the bottles, medicine vials, labeled or not. In one excavation near Bethnal Green, dozens of bottles were recovered containing traces of laudanum, a tincture of alcohol and opium, widely used for everything from coughs to infant teething pains. Some vials were scorched, suggesting they had been heated, perhaps to intensify the drug's effect or mix it with other substances. Was this relief for a mother's grief? A desperate high in a world with few escapes? We will never know, but the bottle speaks. And in the bottom of a privy pit, a child's shoe, small, worn, its heel scuffed from constant use. It is too degraded to tell if it belonged to a boy or girl, but its presence alone is enough to pause the heart. Archaeologists sometimes find such shoes beneath floorboards tucked away as part of folk beliefs meant to ward off evil. Were they lucky charms? Offerings, markers of grief? There are theories, but never certainty. In another site beneath what was once a row of lodging houses near Soho, excavators discovered a cluster of bones, belonging to several infants, their bodies buried beneath hearthstones, without coffins or markers. The bones told a grim tale: malnutrition, respiratory disease, and in some cases, broken ribs. Whether the result of neglect, desperation, or poor medical care, the truth is chilling. These were lives too short to leave written records, but their bones remained, silently contradicting the comforting myths of Victorian progress. But not all finds are tragic. In Svek, the Museum of London's archaeology team uncovered a hand-carved wooden toy, roughly shaped like a dog, hidden in what had once been a kitchen. A crude creation, likely carved by a father or older sibling. It reminds us that even in hunger and hardship, children played. Imagination survived. Laughter echoed in rooms with no furniture. In poverty, there was still love. Then there's the graffiti, scratched into the bricks of old tenements, or carved into the plaster of cellar walls, are names, initials, symbols, a crown, a date, sometimes a vulgar message to a landlord, sometimes a declaration of love. J. Tinggi, 1873. Sarah are true. These were not meant to be preserved. And yet, by surviving, they leave behind echoes of people who knew their words would likely never be printed. Some of the most revealing archaeological sites are not grand digs, but accidental discoveries. Construction on the Crossrail project, the massive underground rail expansion, earthed dozens of Victorian burial sites. One cemetery near Liverpool Street Station contained bodies buried during a cholera outbreak. Some still in wooden coffins, others interred in haste. The graves had no headstones. The records had long vanished. But teeth, bones, and even clothing remained. Dental wares suggested diets of soft bread and tea high in sugar, low in nutrition. Joint damage showed signs of chronic labor, dock work, seamstressing, stone breaking. Some skulls bore signs of rickettsial disease, of vitamin D deficiency, common in children raised in sunless slums. Even the buttons on their coats were studied. A particular kind of four-hole bone button, in the East End, was found in over 24 graves. It was cheap, durable, and standard issue on charity clothing. The presence of these buttons on so many bodies told archaeologists something profound. Most of these people had been dressed for burial not by family, but by institutions' workhouses, infirmaries, or paupers' hospitals. Their final clothes were not stitched with love, but assigned by policy. And yet, they were buried. That matters. It tells us that even in the bureaucracies of the poor, some measure of human dignity was preserved. A blanket, a prayer, a shallow grave, yes, but not a forgotten one. Archaeology also reminds us that the slums were not static. Excavations show layers: a tenement built on the site of a blacksmith's forge, a privy filled in during redevelopment, a yard that had once been a garden, then a trash heap, then paved over. Change was constant. Nothing stayed still. Some of the most haunting discoveries are invisible to the casual observer. Soil samples, taken from beneath former tenement sites, reveal concentrations of human waste, soot, copper, and arsenic. These chemicals indicate industrial runoff, pollution from nearby tanneries and dye works. Children grew up inhaling and ingesting these toxins. The slums did not just destroy bodies, they poisoned them. Slowly, over time, and yet, people endured. One archaeologist described the excavation of a cellar filled with broken crockery plates, mismatched, some repaired with wire staples. These were mended plates. Mending a plate with wire was laborious, often costing more than the plate itself. But it speaks of pride, resourcefulness, a refusal to let things break, even in ruin. There was resilience. The story of Victorian slums is not just a story of suffering. It is also one of tenacity. The objects archaeologists recover: each bottle, shoe, bone, and brush, speak to lives that tried, always, to maintain some sense of normalcy. Tea was poured, hair was brushed, stories were told beside candlelight, birthdays were remembered. Children sang in the street, the soil remembers, and as archaeologists sift through the layers of London's past, they reconstruct not grand events, but daily life. Mundane things, forgotten things, the world as it was, not as it was imagined, in a sense. The ground beneath London is a kind of library, one written in rust and ash, not ink. And the slum dwellers of the 19th century, who left behind so few letters and diaries, have found their voices again, not in words, but in things. As we uncover them, piece by piece, we listen. While children in Bethnal Green picked through refuse for coal or crusts, and mothers in Whitechapel sold lace by candlelight to keep from eviction. Another London unfolded just a few miles west. The fog still clung to the streets, and the clatter of carriage wheels echoed in both worlds. But the sights, the sounds, the smells, and above all, the possibilities were utterly different. This was the London of Mayfair, of Belgravia, of the season, a calendar of opulent balls, dinners, and marriages arranged like chess moves across silk-covered drawing rooms. It was a city where gaslights glimmered not in dim alleys, but on polished brass sconces, where servants polished silver while footmen answered the door in livery, where a day's hardship might be the wrong floral arrangement, or a wrinkle in a gown before a duchess's ball. To fully appreciate the cruelty and contrast of Victorian society, we must walk into these homes not as intruders, but as quiet observers. Let us begin with a house in Grosvenor Square, circa 1875. It is early morning, below stairs. The scullery maid has already been at work since 5 a.m., scrubbing pots from the night before, kindling fires for the day's meals. The cook arrives next, checking the larder, ordering fish for the master's breakfast. A valet is ironing a cravat. A housemaid is sweeping ash from the hearth in the drawing room. But above stairs, the house is still, curtained, hushed in luxury. The lady of the house will rise at 10. Her breakfast, perhaps eggs, toast, and chocolate, will be served on a tray in bed, with the morning post and a fresh-cut flower, arranged not by her, but by her maid. She may not know the names of all 12 servants in her house. She likely never enters the kitchen. Her day will include a ride in Hyde Park, letters to write, a fitting for a new gown, and, perhaps, if she is charitable, a brief visit to a soup kitchen or reform meeting. She is not cruel, but the world of the poor is as distant to her as the colonies of India or Africa, something glimpsed in charity drives, painted in novels, discussed at dinner parties as a social ill, a problem to be addressed by committee. Her husband may be a member of parliament, a barrister, a financier with interests in shipping or railway speculation. His days are long but structured: papers, meetings, port with associates. His clothes are bespoke. His boots are shined by someone he never sees. They live not in isolation, but in a carefully managed orbit of privilege. Their children are educated at home by governesses, then sent off to Eton or Cheltenham. They learn Latin, French, geography, needlework. They have toys, pets, nurseries with warm fires, and nurses to comfort their illnesses. They do not fear hunger. They do not share beds with 6 others. Their only contact with hardship might come through literaturkins, perhaps saw a fleeting glimpse of ragged boys through a carriage window. Yet even among the upper classes, hierarchy reigns. There is the aristocracy, dukes and earls and viscountesses, lives orbit court and monarchy. And there is the gentry, wealthy industrialists, new money merchants, politicians climbing up the rungs of status. Among them, rivalry exists. Old blood looks down on new fortunes. Social climbers look up in envy and calculation. The season is their battleground. From April to August, London's elite flood the city. Townhouses are reopened. Flowers are ordered. Invitations flood in. A reception at Marlborough House, a garden party in Kensington, a soirée in St. James's. The goal is not entertainment, is marriage, introduction, advancement. Débutantes, often no more than 16 or 17, are paraded in white gowns before the Queen, then cycled through a dizzying calendar of appearances until the right match is made. It is not so different from a cattle market, but dressed in pearls and etiquette, and through it all, the poor remain unseen. The same morning, a lady might fret over her hairdresser being late. A seamstress in Lambeth has stitched her dress by gaslight. The slippers she wears at the Duchess's ball were likely assembled by a crippled boy in a workhouse, one who will never attend a ball, never see a ballroom, never taste the food he helps to bring into being. The slums power this world. Behind every corset, every carriage, every gleaming plate is an entire ecosystem of labor. Laundresses, dressmakers, butlers, stable boys, coal porters, and flower girls. They are not merely beneath the stairs, they are beneath the city. Consider the food. A lavish Victorian dinner might consist of 8 courses: oysters, consomme, salmon with hollandaise, roast duck, sweetbreads, game pie, isses, fruit, cheeses, and brandy. It is served by a full household staff in a candlelit dining room lined with portraits of ancestors. The table is set with imported silver, fine linen, perhaps even a centerpiece of exotic fruit carved into a swan. Meanwhile, a few miles east, a family in Shoreditch is dining on bread crusts dipped in tea, or perhaps nothing at all. Meat is rare. Milk may be watered down. Tea is often reused 3 or 4 times. Children chew on bits of sugar to quiet hunger. The 2 Londons exist side by side, and yet barely touch. When they do, it is through spectacle or suspicion. The elite tour slums. During charitable drives, Lady So-and-so, in her velvet gloves, visits a soup kitchen, watched carefully by her maid and driver. Occasionally there is fear, riots, protests, a window smashed by a starving man. Political cartoons warn of the mob. Even Queen Victoria, beloved in many circles, once expressed surprise that people were truly this poor until she was. SHOWN, photographic evidence. But for the most part, the two worlds remain as distant as planets, and yet they are intertwined, because the wealth of Victorian London, the empire itself, is built on exploitation, not only in India and Africa, but at home. The coal that fuels the mansions is dug by child miners. The steel that builds the railways is forged by men who die of black lung. The clothes are stitched by girls who bleed on the fabric. The contrast is so stark, so complete, that it feels surreal. And yet this too is part of the sleep story, because it reminds us, gently but firmly, that history is not a fairy tale. It is a mirror. The people who lived in Belgravia and those who died in Spitalfields were part of the same story. Their lives were unequal, yes, but connected. And so, as the curtain falls on our long walk through Victorian London, we step back from both the slums and the salons. The candlelight flickers, the carriages roll home, the factories quieten for the night. The streets still smell of coal smoke. Somewhere, a baby cries. Somewhere else, a waltz begins. This was the city. This was the empire. Gilded on top, rotten beneath, and aching with the weight of millions of lives some remembered. Many not, but now they are remembered by you. And as your eyes grow heavier, let these images fade gently from your mind. The cobbled streets, the coal-heaped yards, the velvet-covered parlors. Let them drift into the fog, just as the city itself once did. For now, it is enough to have seen it, to have listened. Good night, sleep well. You are not in the slums anymore. Welcome, and thank you for joining me on another gentle journey through the quiet corridors of history. Tonight, we'll be traveling to a world shaped by ritual and routine, where seasons ruled lives, and the murmur of wind through rice paddies carried centuries of tradition. This is not the Japan of swift sword fights or bustling modern cities. This is a slower Japan, a quieter Japan, a land of thatched roofs and muddy paths, of whispered prayers and worn hands, of lantern-lit festivals and secret shrines. Together, we'll step softly into the Edo period, the long, slow era between the early 1600s and mid-1800 SE, when Japan was ruled not by emperors in action, but by shoguns and the systems they imposed. You'll meet the peasant with aching knees and calloused hands, the artisan who carved beauty with no promise of recognition, the samurai bound by rules as strict as any prison, and the silent worshipper, hiding forbidden faith behind household icons. As always, we will tread gently. There are no loud battles here. Only the steady rustle of straw sandals, the soft clink of iron pots, and the quiet resolve of millions who lived and died in the margins of history. So let your breathing slow, let the outside world fall away, and imagine, just for a time, that you live in a village far from any castle, where your life is tied to the rhythm of the rice fields. Let us begin. Imagine, if you will, that it is just before dawn. The sky is still dark, a deep, quiet blue. The stars are fading softly, slowly, as the horizon begins to pale in the east. Somewhere far away, perhaps down a dirt path lined with dew-covered grasses, A rooster calls. The sound carries across a still world not of stone or steel, but of wood, earth, and water. You are waking now. Your eyes open slowly. There is no alarm, no rush. The rhythm of your life is not governed by the hour, but by the sun and the soil. You live in a thatched roof house, a simple structure of wood and packed earth, warm in summer, drafty in winter. It has stood here for decades, perhaps longer, and it will remain long after you are gone. Its roof is thick with straw, darkened by time and soot. Its walls creak gently in the wind. You share this space with your family, your wife, your children, perhaps your parents, 3 generations, side by side, sleeping close for warmth and companionship. The room smells faintly of smoke and rice. Straw. You hear the soft breathing of those around you, the creak of the beams above, the rustle of mice in the thatch. There is no privacy here, but there is togetherness, a shared life woven as tightly as a mat of reeds. You rise from the floor. The tatami mat beneath you is worn but familiar. You move slowly, stiff from yesterday's work and the cold that settled into your joints overnight. You stretch, you cough softly, you begin your day. Your clothing is simple. A rough cotton tunic, dyed in indigo or faded brown, a sash at your waist. If it's summer, you wear a straw hat to shade your eyes. If it's winter, you wrap a scarf of hemp cloth around your neck. Your hands are already dry and cracked, calloused from years of planting, weeding, and harvesting. Your nails are always rimmed with soil. Your feet are always muddy, outside. The village is waking, thatched houses like yours, the edge of the rice fields, forming a loose cluster of life at the base of green hills. Smoke rises from chimneys. Dogs bark in the distance. Chickens cluck and peck at the ground near a coop made from old wood and twine. A narrow stream runs between the homes, its water cold and clear, fed by melting snow higher in the mountains. There are no paved streets here, just packed earth paths, slick with dew and scattered with straw. You walk to the edge of the village. You breathe deeply. The scent of wet earth fills your nose, loamy, comforting. There is a chill in the air, but you know it will be hot by mid-morning. You squint at the sky. A few clouds drift lazily above. No sign of rain, that's good. Or perhaps not. Rain is both blessing and curse. Your work lies before you, the rice fields. They stretch outward in neat, flooded grids. The paddies gleam like mirrors, reflecting the waking sky and the bowed backs of others like you. Every step in the water is a slow pull mud, clutching at your ankles, leeches waiting in the murk. The water ripples around your shins. You've walked these fields since you could walk at all. Your days are governed by the seasons. In spring, you prepare the fields. You plough with a wooden blade pulled by a tired ox, or sometimes by hand. You flood the paddies, carefully managing the channels and dikes. Then, with aching knees, you transplant the delicate seedlings, one by one from nursery beds, each plant no bigger than a grass blade, each one placed by hand, stooping, bending, hour after hour. In summer, you weed. The weeds are constant, stubborn. Your hands are raw from pulling them. Your back screams with each movement. You sweat under the brutal sun. The straw hat offers little protection. Your skin is darkened and cracked. Insects bite. Leeches latch on. But you keep working. In autumn, you harvest. With a sickle in hand, you bend again, cutting the golden stalks in rhythmic sweeps. The rice is bundled, dried, and stored in communal granaries or taxed away. Your heart is heavy, knowing how much will be taken. In winter, there is no rest. You repair tools. You patch your roof. You split firewood, mend clothing, clean out the storage rooms, tend to sick animals. You wait out the cold with pickled vegetables, barley, gruel, and memories of better years. And through it all, through every day and every season, one truth remains. The rice is not entirely yours. You owe tax. A great portion of your crops, sometimes 40%, sometimes 70%, both go to the local lord, the daimyo, who holds this land not by the grace of heaven, but by the command of the shogun. You pay not in coins, but in grain, weighed and measured by officials who care little for your hunger. If the harvest is poor, you still owe it. If there is drought, still owed. If floods wash away your crop still, it is owed. There are no exceptions, no appeals. You live always in debt, not in numbers or contracts, but in obligation. A weight heavier than any bundle of rice, and you are bound not by chains, but by law and custom. You cannot leave your village without permission. A paper must be signed, a reason given. If you leave without it, you are a criminal. Even traveling to the next village to attend a funeral or to buy a rare tool requires approval. You cannot carry a weapon. You are not permitted. Only the samurai may carry swords, even if some haven't drawn them in years. You cannot wear silk or vibrant colors. Your clothing must reflect your station, humble, durable, plain. You cannot build a large house or have elaborate ceremonies. You cannot rise above your place, even if your harvest is bountiful or your skills are great. You are watched, not only by officials, but by your neighbors. The village headman, the temple monk, the tax collector, they all see. They all remember. They all report. Even your friends are careful with words. A wrong sentence spoken in frustration could bring punishment. And, above all, there are the samurai. They pass through the village sometimes, on horseback, in armor, with stern faces and unreadable eyes. They do not speak to you unless necessary. They do not bow. If one takes offense if you block his way, if you speak too boldly, if your eyes linger too long, you could be struck down, and no one would question it. The law is not yours. You live in fear, not of war or invasion, but of humiliation and reprisal. Fear of being noticed, fear of being forgotten. And yet, amid this hardship, there are moments of softness, of beauty, of endurance. There is the scent of rice boiling over the hearth, mingled with miso and wild herbs. The laughter of children chasing each other between houses, barefoot and loud. The quiet of a winter night, snow muffling every sound. As the fire crackles gently and your family huddles close, there are festivals, once or twice a year. Oben in summer, New Year in winter. Times when the village transforms with paper lanterns, food stalls, music, and dance. You wear your best clothes, simple but clean. You tie your hair neatly. You visit the shrine. You offer prayers. You remember your ancestors. There are rituals for planting, for harvest, for weddings, for mourning. The seasons are not just a cycle, but a story you live inside of. You find meaning in the repetition, in the rhythm, in the familiar. You know the sound of frogs in early spring, the smell of freshly cut rice, the warmth of sun-dried straw mats. You endure, not because life is easy, but because this is your life. It is all you have known, and it is enough. You are not a hero. You are not a warrior. You are not remembered in scrolls or poems, but you are the foundation. You grow the food, You keep the rhythm. You pass on the stories, and as the sun sinks low and the frogs begin their chorus in the flooded paddies, you walk slowly home. Your back is sore, your hands are rough, but there is warmth ahead. A bowl of soup, a place to sit, a child's hand in yours. This is peasant life in feudal Japan. Silent, enduring, invisible to the lords and poets, but real in every muddy footprint, every grain of rice, every breath of cold morning air, and beneath it all, the quiet dignity of survival. The sun is high now, casting long shadows across the narrow dirt roads of the village. The sound of insects buzzes softly in the warm air. A few chickens pecked lazily at the ground, and the scent of miso soup lingers from the morning meal. Your hands ache from weeding the fields. Your knees, still damp from the paddy water, crackle softly when you kneel to drink from a ladle. It is an ordinary day, and yet everything about it, what you wear, what you eat, what you say, even the way you sit, is shaped, not by choice, but by an invisible latticework of rules. In Edo, Japan, life was governed not only by nature and need, but by law. Not the kind of law that shouted through courts or swung from gallows. No, this was a softer law, a quieter law, one that wrapped itself around you like morning mist, unseen but everywhere. Let's begin at the highest level, the Tokugawa shogunate, which ruled Japan from the early 1600s to the mid-1800s, did not govern through chaos or conquest. It governed through order, predictable, ritualized, relentless. Order at the heart of this system was a structure known as the four-class system, or Shina, KSH. It was deceptively simple. 4 classes arranged like a ladder you could never climb. At the top were the samurai warriors in name, administrators in practice. They carried swords, enforced rules, and lived by a code that prized loyalty, honor, and obedience. Beneath them were the farmers, the peasants. That is, you. You were considered second in rank, not because your life was easy, but because your work growing rice was seen as morally upright. Rice was the foundation of the economy, the symbol of prosperity. And so, you were praised, in theory, and burdened in reality. Next came the artisans, blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, and potters. Skilled hands with no land, who shaped beauty and tools, but were afforded little respect. At the bottom were the merchant stealers of goods and money. Ironically, they were often wealthier than the others, but despised as parasites who produced nothing. Outside the system altogether were the outcast classes, the Eta and Hinendos, who handled death, leather, butchery, or simply fell afoul of society's boundaries. These people lived in the shadows, their presence acknowledged only in whispers. This hierarchy was not fluid. You could not move between classes. If you were born a peasant, you would die a peasant. If your father grew rice, so would you. Social mobility, upward or downward, was seen not as opportunity, but as disorder. And disorder was the enemy of peace. But how was this enforced? Not with patrols or soldiers, not most of the time. Instead, it was enforced with paper, ritual, surveillance, and silence. Let us begin with the village headman. He is not a samurai, but he speaks with the authority of the castle. He is one of you, a farmer perhaps, but entrusted with leadership. He maintains the village records. He collects the rice tax. He settles disputes, reports crimes, and perhaps, most importantly, he watches. He knows who is behind on taxes. He knows who argued loudly after dusk. He knows whose daughter eloped with a merchant's son from a neighboring hamlet. He may not act on everything, but he remembers. Then there are the officials from the domain's castle town. They arrive in procession, perhaps once or twice a year, with account books and quiet eyes. They examine the rice stores. They listen to the headman. They make notes, and they leave, saying little. But their presence lingers. And then there are your neighbors. You see them every day in the fields, at the shrine, during festivals. You share food, gossip, hardship, and yet they too are part of the system. If you speak out of turn, if you hide rice from the tax count, if you express forbidden beliefs, they might report you. Or perhaps they won't, but they know that you might report them. This mutual surveillance is not formal, not codified, but it is ever present. You begin to speak more carefully, walk more cautiously. You learn which questions not to ask. You learn how to bow just deeply enough. Travel is restricted. You cannot leave the village without permission. A formal travel pass, known as a tigata, must be requested and approved. It must include your name, your destination, your reason for going, and how long you will be away. Without it, you are a fugitive. And why would you leave? The world beyond. The village is not yours. The roads are watched. The checkpoints are manned. The forests are rumored to hide bandits and ghosts alike. No, you stay, even during festivals, when the mood is light and paper lanterns swing in the summer air. The rules do not disappear. The dances are prescribed. The prayers are proper. The songs follow ancient patterns. The shrine is watched by temple stewards. Too much drinking, too loud a laugh, and you may draw attention. And attention is rarely good. Then there are the laws of appearance. You may not wear bright colors. You may not wear silk. You may not own more than a certain number of garments. Your house must not exceed a certain size. Your roof must be thatched, not tiled. Even your hairstyle, how you part your hair, how you tie it, may be dictated by law, tradition, or both. This was sumptuary, laurels meant to preserve class. Distinctions by controlling personal expression. To wear silk without permission was not merely vanity, was insubordination. And so, the village looks the same. Modest homes, dark clothing, quiet streets. Uniformity becomes peace. Your voice, too, is shaped by rules. You do not question authority. Openly, you do not speak ill of the samurai. You do not complain in ways that draw attention. Over time, your very thoughts begin to move within narrower paths. And perhaps, if you live long enough, the boundaries of this world come to feel natural. You no longer question why the taxes are so high. You no longer wonder what lies beyond the mountains. You forget to ask why the merchant's house is larger than yours, even though you labor and he does not. This is not tyranny in the traditional sense. There are no nightly raids, no fires in the square, but it is controlled, quiet, and total. You follow the rules because you must, but also because you have been taught to believe they are necessary, that they are just, that they are natural, but beneath the surface there are cracks. A whispered joke about the taxman, a secret gathering at night, far from the headman's house, a prayer that is not Buddhist, not Shinto, but something older, or something banned, a rice bundle hidden beneath the floorboards, untaxed and unseen. Resistance exists, always, but it is soft, hidden. It takes the form of silence, of refusal, of slowness. This is the paradox of Edo Japan, a society that prized order above all else, and yet was held together not by force, but by endless, invisible threads of expectation and fear. You wake, you work, you obey. You bow when expected. You speak in measured tones. You teach your children to do the same. And the machine turns smoothly, and in this turning there is a kind of peace, a peace of repetition, a peace of knowing your place, your role, your duties, but also a peace that demands silence, that demands you never dream too boldly, never act too freely, never step too far. And so, as the day cools and the shadows lengthen, you return home once more. You step through your narrow doorway. You remove your sandals. You kneel by the fire. You have survived another day of obedience, another day of quiet resistance. This is the law of the village, not written on stone, but etched in every glance, every bow, every rule about sleeves and speech and sandals, a law not of punishment, but of pressure, soft, inescapable, enduring. Now, let us step away from the rice paddies. Let the scent of damp soil and the chatter of sparrows fade into the distance. Let the quiet rhythms of the village soften behind us, as we make our way slowly, carefully toward the city, toward Edo, toward the heart of power. It is the year 1701. The shogunate has ruled Japan for nearly a century. Peace is maintained, but it is a delicate, rigid peace enforced by ceremony, reinforced by structure. Everything has its place. Every man has his duty. And here, in this tightly controlled world, a moment occurs. A brief, impulsive act. A drawing of a sword. And from it, a story unfolds. A story of honor, vengeance, and the limits of law. A story that would be told and retold across centuries, in scrolls, in plays, in whispered conversations by the hearth. The story of the 47 Ronin. Let us begin at the castle. It is early spring in Edo Plum. Blossoms are just beginning to open in the gardens beyond the palace walls. The air is crisp, the light pale. Within the stately halls of Edo Castle, everything is as it should, be quiet, orderly, pristine. The shogun, supreme military ruler of Japan, is hosting envoys from the imperial court in Kyoto. It is a rare event, more ceremony than politics. The shogun rules the land, but the emperor still holds spiritual significance. These visits are heavy with symbolism. Every gesture matters. Every robe is examined. Every bow is measured to ensure that proper decorum is maintained. A high-ranking court official named Kira Yoshinaka is tasked with instructing the provincial lords in the complex rituals of imperial etiquette. One of these lords is Asano Nagano, the young daimyo of aka Domain. Asano is proud, perhaps a little hot-headed, but sincere. He arrives with his retinue, prepared to do his duty, but the atmosphere is tense. Lord Kira, it seems, is not pleased with Asano, whether it is due to a personal slight, a lack of bribes, or a perceived disrespect. We cannot know for certain. The records are quiet, restrained, as they often are in such matters. But the tension builds. Over several days, Lord Kira reportedly insults Asano repeatedly, subtly, perhaps cruelly. Sarcastic remarks, dismissive gestures, cold treatment. The exact words are lost to time. Then, on a day like any other, within the grand corridors of Edo Castle, something happens that was never supposed to happen. Lord Asano draws his sword. He strikes at Kira. It is not a mortal wound. Kira survives, but the act itself, the drawing of a weapon within the shogun's castles, a grave crime. a violation of the strictest rule. There is no trial, no lengthy debate. Lord Asano is ordered to commit seppuku ritual suicide before the day ends. His lands are confiscated. His family is stripped of rank. His retainers are dismissed. And his home province, aka, is thrown into sudden uncertainty. And just like that, the proud lord becomes a condemned man, and his retainers, once samurai bound to serve, become ronin, masterless, honorless, rootless. Among these ronin is a man named Jishi Kuranasuke, who served as Asano's chief counselor. He is older, thoughtful, and known for his quiet diligence. In the days after Asano's death, he gathers the former retainers. Some leave, others stay, and slowly a decision begins to form. They will seek revenge, but they know this cannot be done in haste. The law is clear. Vengeance against a shogunal official is a crime. Open attack would be suicide, and so they disappear into the world. For nearly 2 years, 47 men dispersed across cities and provinces. Some become merchants. Others take menial jobs. One poses as a drunkard, frequenting brothels and gambling dens. Even Jishi himself is seen in Kyoto, seemingly drunk and disheveled, often sprawled in the street. But all of this is calculated. They are playing a role, disarming suspicion, waiting for the right moment. They watch Kira's estate in Edo. They study the guards, the comings and goings, the layout of the grounds. They collect weapons in secret. They communicate through coded messages, through trusted friends, through ritualized phrases passed quietly between hands. And all the while, they wait. Then, on a cold December night in 1702, they strike. 47 men, in silence. They break into Kira's mansion with precision. They subdue guards. They search the rooms. It is not a wild slaughter. It is calm, deliberate. They find Kira hiding in a shed, refusing to identify himself. But they offer him the chance to die by his own hand. He refuses, and so they do what they came to do. Then, almost incredibly, they do not flee. They march through the snowy streets of Edo, carrying Kira's severed head. Not hidden, not ashamed. In silence, they bring it to the grave of Lord Asano and place it there in offering. And then they surrender. They are imprisoned. The city is silent with debate. What should be done? On one hand, they broke the law. They killed a high official. They planned it in secret. On the other hand, they acted with loyalty, with honor. They avenged their lord in the old way, the way of Bushido, the warrior's code. The shogun deliberates for weeks. In the end, a decision is made. The 47 ronin are permitted to die with honor. One by one, they commit seppuku as their master had done. Their deaths are quiet, ritualized, ceremonial. Their bodies are buried alongside Asano's at Sangokuji Temple in Edo. And their story becomes legend. But what does this tale mean? It is tempting to see it as a heroic epic. And in many ways, it is. The ronin are praised for their loyalty, their patience, their strategy. Plays are written, poems composed. Their grave becomes a pilgrimage site. But underneath the glory, there is a question. The ronin did not act out of rebellion. They acted within the confines of a moral system that prized loyalty above law. Their punishment, honorable suicide, was not justice in the modern sense, but a resolution within the tightly bound codes of Edo society. This was not a revolution. It was a reaffirmation of order, a sacrifice to preserve the ideal of loyalty within a system that demanded obedience. And yet, it revealed something else. to dot, it showed the limits of the shogunate's control. That even in a world of surveillance and ritual, emotions still stirred beneath the surface. That even in a land of silence, vengeance could whisper its way into the heart of the capital. Their act was not just a moment of violence, it was a test of the system, of the code, of the very balance between law and loyalty. And for a brief moment, everything stood still. Even today, their graves remain at St. Covered in moss, surrounded by incense. People still visit, still bow, still leave offerings. Not to condone the killing, but to honor the devotion. Because in this quiet tale of planning and patience, we see something deeply human. A yearning for meaning, a belief in duty, a willingness to wait and to act. And so, as we return from the city to the village, as the snow melts and the roads clear once more, we carry with us not a tale of heroes, but a tale of choices, made slowly, made with care, and made, perhaps, at great cost. This was the story of the 47 Ronin, not just swords and silence, but loyalty, law, and the long shadow of tradition. Let us now leave behind the samurai and the city. Let the echoes of steel blades and solemn rituals fade into the distance. Let the stone walls of Edo give way to the forest paths again, to the winding roads of rural Japan, where small villages lie tucked between the folds of green, hills and misty rice terraces. We are not going back to the bustling city, not tonight. Instead, we walk quietly into the countryside, to a place older and quieter, a place of incense and folded hands, where prayers are whispered and gods wear many names. But not all prayers, you see, were spoken aloud. Tonight, we trace a forgotten path, a path of secrecy, devotion, and silence. Tonight, we follow the footsteps of those who believed, but could not be seen. We follow the hidden Christians, the Koku Kirishiten, and uncover a quiet chapter of Japanese history, buried beneath layers of fear, adaptation, and unshakable faith. Let us begin. It started far away, not in Japan, but in Portugal and Spain in the 1500s. Catholic missionaries began to arrive in Japan, most notably the Jesuits, led by the famous missionary Francis Xavier, who landed in 1549 at first. They were received with curiosity. Japan, especially during the late Sengoku period, was fractured and chaotic daimyo's feudal lords vied for power, and many were open to foreign trade and new ideas if it brought advantage. Some allowed the Jesuits to build churches, others even converted. Christianity began to spread, especially in Kyushu, in the southern islands of Japan by the 1580s. There were hundreds of thousands of Christian converts in Japan. Churches were built, crosses were raised, the names of Christ and Mary were spoken in Japanese homes. But this openness did not last. By the end of the 16th century, the tides were turning. The new rulers of Japan, especially Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and later the Tokugawa shogunate, viewed Christianity with growing suspicion. They feared that it could be a tool of colonial conquest, a seed of foreign influence that might one day blossom into rebellion. In 1614, Christianity was officially banned in Japan. Churches were destroyed. Priests were expelled or hunted. Christian imagery was outlawed. Owning a Bible could be a death sentence. And yet, people remembered. They did not all abandon their faith. They went underground. Imagine now a quiet village in Nagasaki Prefecture, a fishing hamlet, small and wind-worn, with little to draw attention. The homes are simple. The lives here are humble. But inside one of these houses, behind a paper screen or tucked within a household altar, there is a hidden image, a statue of Kannon, the Buddhist goddess of mercy. But to those who know, it is not Kannon. It is Mary, the Virgin Mother. Her features have been softened, blurred, given the gentle ambiguity of Asian divinity, but her hands are folded in prayer. Sometimes she holds a child. Sometimes her eyes look downward with infinite sorrow. She is not worshipped in public. She is not named aloud, but prayers are still whispered to her. Prayers not found in Buddhist sutras, but in adapted Latin, passed down orally for generations. In a corner of the room, a family might gather. A grandmother leads the chant. Her voice is soft, melodic. The children join in, not entirely understanding the words, but feeling the weight of them. These prayers are not written. The Bible is gone. What survives is memory, a line of sound carried from grandmother to granddaughter, father to son. The Orosho, they're called Christian prayers, transformed by time and fear. Sometimes an old man carries a set of wooden beads worn smooth from handling. He calls them a rosary, but they are not Catholic rosaries, as the Portuguese once used. They are shorter, simplified. Changed, everything has changed to survive. It had to. Over time, the hidden Christians began to adapt even more deeply. They camouflaged their religion in local tradition. Saints were disguised as Buddhist figures. Prayers were spoken in the rhythm of local chants. The sign of the cross was hidden in casual gestures, scratching the chest, or folding hands in a certain way. Images of Jesus were carved into stone lanterns, disguised as Jesus statues. A fisherman's charm might secretly bear the shape of the cross. A child's toy might have a carving of crude, but recognizably tender. In some regions, they created unique icons, known as Maria Kannon Buddhist statues, that doubled as depictions of the Virgin Mary. They also developed their own ritual leaders, known as Zakata, who handled baptisms in secret because priests were gone, executed, deported. No sacraments remained. And yet, the rituals continued. Water was poured, names were spoken, blessings given, in whispered ceremonies behind paper. Walls families practiced their faith in ways unrecognizable to outsiders, and often to themselves. Was this still Christianity? Or had it become something entirely new? Life was not easy for the hidden Christians. Every year, villagers were required to participate in a public ritual known as the Fumiyitha, stepping on of sacred Christian images. Officials would lay down carved images of Christ or Mary, and each person was required to step on them to prove they were not Christian. Those who hesitated were reported. Some were tortured, others imprisoned, some executed publicly. As an example, entire families could be punished, villages could be burned, even a rumor could lead to catastrophe. But still, in the quietest corners, faith remained. Parents taught children not just how to pray but how to hide their prayers. The sound of a Christian hymn might be mistaken for a lullaby. A cross carved into driftwood might be passed off as decoration. And all the while, centuries passed. The ban remained in place from 1614 to 1873, over 250 years of silence. When Japan reopened to the world in the mid-19th century, Christian missionaries returned. When they did, they found something incredible. In 1865, a French priest named Bernard Petitjean was in Nagasaki, building a small Catholic church. One day, a group of local villagers came to him, quietly, cautiously. They asked one question: where is the statue of the Virgin Mary? And then, even more carefully, they said, our hearts are the same as yours. It was the beginning of a remarkable rediscovery. Tens of thousands of hidden Christians came forward, revealing that their families had kept the faith alive in secret for generations. But their Christianity was changed. Without priests, without formal liturgy, without the Bible. They had built something new, rooted in tradition, yet transformed by time and fear. Some returned to the Catholic Church, others chose to preserve their syncretic traditions, blending Buddhist and Shinto elements with Christian faith, a unique form of spirituality that resisted both persecution and assimilation. Even today, in remote corners of Nagasaki and Goto Island, descendants of hidden Christians still exist. Some still carry on secret rituals. Some still pray in chants whose Latin roots are barely recognizable. Some still keep statues of Mary hidden in plain sight, in the silence between footsteps during a forbidden gathering. Beneath the quiet streets of modern Tokyo lies a city that no longer breathes, but which still lingers in shadows layered in earth, soaked in silence, and tucked beneath office towers and subway platforms. This city, once known as Edo, thrived during the Tokugawa period, growing into one of the largest urban centers in the world by the early 18th century, while palaces, temples, and samurai districts were the official face of Edo. The city's real memory is preserved in a far humbler, darker place. Its garbage pits, latrines, and forgotten sewer lines. Over centuries, layer upon layer of refuse, accumulated discarded bowls, soiled rags, broken combs, worn sandals, and even personal letters, all quietly buried beneath the floors of commoner homes, under alleyways, and at the bottom of public latrines. It is here, in these unexpected vaults of memory, that archaeologists have begun to uncover stories not written in scrolls or recorded by scribes, but told by the things people threw away. The act of digging into these former cesspools and trash heaps may seem unglamorous, but for researchers it's an act of almost sacred reconstruction. Excavations in former neighborhoods of Edo have unearthed a wide variety of artifacts that allow scholars to reconstruct not only what people ate or wore, but how they lived, what they valued, what they feared, and even how they loved. Trash, as it turns out, is never just trash, is an accidental archive of the everyday. When archaeologists first began to examine Edo's buried waste pits in the mid-20th century, they found layers of organic refuse perfectly preserved in anaerobic soil, fish bones, peach pits, barley husks, and even human waste. Each item suspended in time like an entry in a forgotten diary. These remnants, unspectacular in isolation, begin to tell remarkably detailed stories when studied in context. One of the most revealing sources of insight came from former latrine sites. In Edo, sanitation was handled with surprising sophistication. For the time, night soil, or human waste, was not simply left to fester, was collected, sold, and reused as fertilizer. Yet despite this early recycling system, many latrines still ended up serving as dumping grounds for trash and refuse. Inside these old toilets, archaeologists discovered not just the remains of meals, bits of rice and millet, miso broth, and seaweed, but also the detritus of personal life, snapped hairpins, broken mirrors, chipped bowls, and once pieces of porcelain now dulled by time. Sometimes these artifacts appear to have been discarded accidentally, lost down a hole in the floor. Other times, their presence is more deliberate, like offerings to forgetfulness, quietly hidden beneath wooden boards and tatami mats. These discarded items speak volumes about the texture of everyday Edo life. Take, for example, the combs. Archaeologists found combs of all types, ranging from finely carved cherry wood with intricate inlays to crude mass-produced pieces made from bamboo or horn. Some were still embedded with traces of hair. Others bore the remnants of scented oil or lice treatments, providing intimate glimpses into the hygiene and grooming habits of both women and men. Alongside them were cosmetic containers, small lacquered boxes filled with hardened traces of white face powder, rouge, and even tiny brushes still stained with red pigment. These finds suggest more than vanity. They hint at daily rituals of self-presentation, social aspiration, and fleeting elegance, even among the city's poorest women. What was perhaps most poignant, however, were the items that once belonged to children. In some pits, archaeologists uncovered tiny sandals woven straw shoes barely the length of a hand lying next to wooden tops, animal-shaped whistles or clay dolls, many with broken limbs or worn faces. In one especially haunting excavation, beneath what was once a row house, a small rattle was found beside a comb and an unfinished bowl of rice. Such objects suggest a child's presence, a moment of daily life suddenly interrupted. Did a young boy drop his toy and forget it? Was it buried on purpose, as part of a ritual, or after a loss? These questions linger unanswered, but the objects themselves continue to whisper across the centuries. The trash heaps of Edo also revealed the intricacies of food, culture, and class. Alongside bones and shells, archaeologists uncovered hundreds of shards of porcelain and earthenware. Some were simple rice bowls, thick and undecorated, clearly used by laborers or shopkeepers. Others were far more refined cups and sake bottles bearing elegant blue and white patterns imported from China or Korea, cracked or chipped, but once proudly displayed on family shelves. The contrast in quality suggests a subtle hierarchy of wealth among the city's commoners, where even within tight urban quarters, there were social distinctions in what kind of cup one drank from, or what dishes were brought out for guests. Traces of seasoning, such as mustard seeds or hints of fermented soy, also told tales of culinary habits. What spices were accessible, how food was preserved, and how seasonal rhythms shaped the city's palate. Beyond household items, archaeologists also stumbled upon more enigmatic objects, letters, often written hastily on torn pieces of washi paper. Though most were illegible or water-damaged, a few could still be deciphered. One read, simply, "The lantern has burned low, I wait, come soon." Another, more cryptic, bore only a name and a date. These scraps, thrown away or lost in the grime of daily life, suggest emotional worlds hidden behind Edo's rigid social codes. They may have been love notes, business dealings, or even messages never delivered. Whatever their origin, they now serve as fragile bridges between past and present fragments of speech caught mid-thought, still echoing faintly under the ground. One of the most mysterious discoveries came not from a public dump, but from beneath the wooden floors of a long-demolished townhouse. There, beneath layers of soil, a cluster of strange items had been buried together. A cracked porcelain doll, a rusty coin, a tooth, a tiny lacquer box, and a lock of hair tied with string. At first, researchers thought it might be random, but the careful arrangement, along with Edo-era folklore, suggested otherwise. In Tokugawa, Japan, people often buried small charms under their homes for protection against illness, fire, or evil spirits. Some believed that placing personal items beneath the floor could strengthen the bond between the household and its ancestors. Others used such rituals to mourn quietly, without drawing public attention. In this case, the combination of childlike and adult objects hinted at private grief, preserved in ritual, sealed in earth. Taken together, these archaeological finds form a kind of soft, whispering biography of Edo, not of its shoguns or poets, but of its common people, people who never made it into the official records, people who lived within paper-thin walls, bathed in public, worked long hours, borrowed sandals, and hoped for quiet blessings in a loud world. Their belongings, lost or discarded, now re-emerge in fragments. They speak of lives that were full and flawed, humble yet dignified, punctuated by birthdays, arguments, illnesses, daydreams, and meals shared with others. They speak of people who knew they would not be remembered, except perhaps in the things they left behind. So the next time you stand in the noise and brightness of modern Tokyo, consider what lies beneath your feet, beneath the pavement, the railways, the skyscrapers. There are still wooden combs and love letters resting in silence. A child's sandal, a broken bowl, a single fishbone. These are not just artifacts, they are echoes. They are the soft heartbeat of a city that still lingers beneath the surface, waiting to be noticed again. Imagine the slow, steady tapping of a chisel on lacquered wood. The room is dim, lit by soft daylight filtering through a paper screen. A craftsman, middle-aged, perhaps older, leans over his workbench, eyes straining in the quiet. His hands are worn, calloused, stained from decades of mixing dyes, grinding pigments, carving, and sanding. His name is not known to the nobles who use his art. He is an artisan, a man of skill, a man of labor, and, paradoxically, a man of low rank. In Edo period Japan, artisans were vital to the country's economy, culture, and aesthetics, yet they lived under a persistent shadow of social invisibility. Their place was fixed beneath peasants in the official class hierarchy. This is the story of those who created beauty in a rigid world that offered them neither status nor freedom. It is a quiet tale, filled with fine brushes, slow kilns, hard benches, and the weight of talent constrained by caste. Let us step into their world. During the Tokugawa shogunate, 1603 to 1868, society was structured into a rigid hierarchy. At the top stood the samurai, followed by peasants, then artisans, and finally, merchants. This arrangement might seem counterintuitive to modern ears. Why should those who produce exquisite goods or run complex businesses be relegated to the bottom tiers? But in the ideology of the time, worth was not measured by creativity or profit, but by proximity to the state's moral and political ideals. Samurai upheld order and virtue through military service. Peasants, though often impoverished, were valued for their role in sustaining life through rice cultivation, the lifeblood of the nation. Artisans, while appreciated for their wares, were seen as creators of non-essentials. Beautiful, yes, but not foundational. Merchants, who profited from others' labor, were regarded with suspicion. Artisans were trapped in a paradox. Their work was admired, even coveted, but their social standing remained low. They were respected only insofar as their craft served the needs and aesthetics of higher classes. Imagine being a master of your art, your lacquerware gleaming in the homes of nobles, your folding screens adorning the halls of temples, yet unable to wear silk, carry a sword, or walk freely in castle towns. You were both necessary and disregarded. In cities like Kyoto, Edo, and Kanazawa, artisan quarters bustled quietly with life. These were not noisy markets or rowdy workshops. Instead, they exuded an atmosphere of methodical repetition. The clink of hammers, the swish of brushes, the hiss of boiling daivatsul formed the music of daily existence. Let us imagine the life of one such artisan dyer in Kyoto, working with indigo. He wakes before sunrise. The air is still cool. He eats a small meal, rice pickled vegetables, perhaps a bit of dried fish if it's a good day. Then he walks the short distance to his workspace, where vats of indigo dye have been fermenting for weeks, their surface bubbling slightly with life. The smell is sharp, earthy, strangely sweet. It clings to his clothing and his skin. Each day follows a pattern. Stir the vats, check the cloth, dip, lift air, dip again. Indigo must oxidize in layers to reach its deepest blue. The process is not rushed. The cloth must be rinsed, dried, inspected, readied, over and over. A single kimono might require dozens of dips. He knows every shade of blue by eye. He sees subtleties no one else does. His fingers are permanently stained. His lungs are not what they once were, but he is respected within the artisan quarter for his consistency, his mastery, his silence. And yet, outside that quarter, he is invisible. A samurai might nod politely when purchasing his cloth, but would never learn his name. He cannot enter the higher districts. He cannot dine in elite establishments. His artistry travels further than he ever will. Artisans were not without community. Many belonged to officially recognized craft guilds known as za. These guilds offered a degree of protection, exclusive rights to produce certain goods, access to materials, and shared knowledge passed down through generations. Membership often required familial ties, years of apprenticeship, and proven competence. These guilds operated under the close watch of the shogunate. Artisans were registered, taxed, and licensed. Their output was monitored. Prices could be controlled. Materials were rationed. Nothing escaped the gaze of officialdom in some cases. Guilds became prestigious, especially those producing items for the court or temples. Swordsmiths, lacquer artists, fabric weavers, ceramicists each had their own guild, traditions, styles, and secrets. But prestige did not always equate to freedom. Take the case of Makazuka Ozan, a ceramist whose family lineage traced back generations. Even as he developed new techniques that would later gain fame internationally, he remained bound by the restrictions of his status. His kill had to be approved. His apprentices were limited by law. The aesthetics of his pottery were subject to the tastes of the ruling class. Artisans innovated constantly, but always within the lines drawn for them. Their genius was quietly regulated. Wander through a temple in Niku, and you'll see woodwork so intricate it seems alive. Dragons, writhing in gold-leafed eaves. Blossoms carved so delicately they cast shadows like real petals. Enter a Kyoto tea house, and your fingers might trace the rim of a porcelain bowl smooth, cold, yet warm with subtle asymmetry. These were the works of artisans, but their names are largely lost. Some worked in specialized ateliers serving daimyo, families, or religious institutions. Others labored in obscurity, sending their works to market via merchant intermediaries. It was not uncommon for the artisan's identity to be absorbed into the brand or workshop objects signed by the shop, not the maker. This anonymity was cultural too. The ideal was humility. A craftsman should perfect his technique, not his. Reputation, beauty, not ego, was the goal. But this tradition also erased individuality. In later centuries, scholars and collectors would scramble to identify the hands behind great works, reverse engineering signatures, comparing brushstrokes, analyzing tool marks. The artisans themselves had passed away without ever hearing praise. From the world beyond their walls, though often omitted from official records, women played vital roles in artisan life. In family workshops, wives, daughters, and widows assisted with nearly every part of production. They spun thread, prepared dyes, cleaned brushes, painted base layers, wove fabric, and helped manage apprentices. In some households, women ran the books and negotiated with merchants. In others, they took over entirely when husbands died or grew ill, yet formal recognition was rare. Women were not permitted to hold guild licenses in most trades. Their names were not listed in registries. Still, the rhythm of their work shaped the products that moved through Japan's cultural arteries. Quiet labor, without signature or song. One can imagine a widow working late into the night, continuing her husband's dye work, ensuring that orders were fulfilled. Her daughter grinds pigment beside her, hands stained. Outside, the town sleeps. Inside, art continues. The elite relied on artisans, perhaps more than they wished to admit. Samurai needed swordsmiths to maintain their blades, tailors to dress them, scribes to copy their scrolls, and lacquerers to adorn their possessions. Temples needed bellcasters, woodcarvers, and stonemasons. Nobles needed everything from incense burners to folding fans. Yet despite this dependence, artisans were kept firmly in their place. They could not dine with the elite. They could not wear elaborate silks. They could not ride horses in certain districts. Interactions were ritualized and hierarchical. A samurai might commission a piece, offer feedback, and pay handsomely but never express gratitude. Artisans were expected to bow deeply, avert their eyes, and accept whatever terms were offered. Yet some artisans learned to maneuver within this structure. They created house styles that became coveted. They aligned themselves with influential patrons. They crafted subtle symbols into their work signatures only the initiated could decipher. It was a quiet rebellion, written in gold leaf and iron glaze. The Tokugawa period was not static. Despite the strictures, artisans found ways to evolve. In pottery, new glaze techniques emerged. In textiles, patterns shifted with changing tastes. In carpentry, temples reached new heights literally and figuratively. But innovation had to be quiet. Too much deviation could offend a patron. Too radical a design could violate sumptuary laws, which regulated luxury items, colors, and patterns. Artisans learned to work within invisible boundaries. This restraint, paradoxically, produced some of the most refined art in Japanese history. The discipline of minimalism, the precision of line, the elegance of imperfection all were born from constraint. Simplicity was not a lack of skill, but its highest expression. A potter's hand paused not because he lacked ideas, but because he knew how little was too much. As Japan opened to the West in the 19th century, the old class system began to erode. The Meiji Restoration abolished the formal distinctions between samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants. Some artisans found new markets abroad. Others struggled as industrialization replaced handwork with mass production. Workshops closed. Traditions vanished. Tools were sold. But some adapted. They merged traditional forms with Western demand. They rebranded themselves as artists rather than craftsmen. They found ways to preserve the knowledge passed down through generations, sometimes through formal schools, sometimes through whispered instruction. Today, descendants of those artisans still work in cities like Kyoto, Kanazawa, and Mashika. Their methods are older than the machines that surround them. Their studios smell of lacquer, of earth, of pine shavings. Their legacy is one of silent persistence. The artisan's burden was not only physical, it was social, spiritual, and emotional. To labor with care, to pour your soul into an object, only to be disregarded by the very people who admired your creation, required deep endurance. It demanded a kind of humility that bordered on invisibility, and yet, from that invisibility emerged extraordinary beauty. The next time you see a hand-painted kimono, a carved comb, a calligraphy brush, or a porcelain bowl pause, behind it stands not only skill, but centuries of silent struggle, of anonymous devotion, of mastery without applause. In a world that prized hierarchy over humanity, the artisan carved meaning from repetition, crafted elegance from constraint, and left behind a quiet legacy, not of rebellion, but of resilience. And so, let the soft scrape of their tools, the hush of their studios, and the rhythm of their labor guide you deeper into rest. The artisans may have lived in silence, but their beauty endures, whispering softly through time. In the quiet hum of rural Japan, life was not measured only in harvests and hardship. For all the mud-caked labor and ceaseless obligation, there was also a deep and comforting rhythm to the passing seasons. This rhythm gave rise to rituals, ceremonies, and subtle wonders, small threads of magic that wove their way through the lives of ordinary people. Festivals brought warmth to the cold, brightness to the gloom, and a shared heartbeat to the scattered villages that dotted the rice fields, mountainsides, and coastal plains. Imagine yourself once again as a peasant in the Edo period. The days are long, the nights short, and your duties many. But you live not in a vacuum of toil. You live in a world breathing with meaning. The calendar is not just a way to mark. Time it is alive with spirits and ceremonies, both great and small. Time, in this world, is circular, marked not only by sunrises and sunsets, but by dances, bonfires, chants, and whispers. Let us begin our journey through the festivals and folklore that shaped this way of life. Each summer, the air grows thick and humid, and the smell of damp earth blends with the smoke of cooking fires. It is time for Obon, the festival of the dead. Obon is not a single day, but a series of days when the border between this world and the next grows thin. The villagers prepare by cleaning the family altars and placing fresh offerings, bowls of rice, slices of melon, small cups of sake. They decorate the doorways with bamboo and hang lanterns that glow softly in the dusky evenings. Imagine standing at the edge of your village, the sky darkening into violet, the first lanterns flickering to life. You and your neighbors walk slowly along the path to the temple, carrying paper lanterns of your own. The flickering light is not for you, but for the spirit's ancestors returning home for a brief visit. In these nights, the air is full of memory. Dances are performed in circles, bon odoria repeated, graceful steps that echo generations of feet moving in the same patterns. The rhythm is simple, the drum steady, and the entire village moves as one body. It is not performance, but remembrance. And as the music winds down, the lanterns are set afloat on rivers, ponds, or simply carried down roads guiding the spirits back, gently, to their world. Obon is sorrowful and joyful, solemn and light. For the peasant in Edo period Japan, it is a moment of peace, of connection, and of reassurance that the past still walks beside you, even if only in whispers. If summer is for remembering, then winter specifically, the start of a new year. For beginning again, Oshikatsu, the Japanese New Year, is not a single celebration but an entire season of preparation and ritual. It is a time to cleanse, purify, and reset not just the home, but the heart and spirit. In the final days of the old year, villagers engage in a soji, the grand cleaning. Floors are swept, altars wiped down, clutter burned or stored away. Soot is scrubbed from hearths. This is more than tidiness. It is spiritual hygiene, a way to invite good fortune into the space where one lives and breathes. In the early morning of the new year, families rise before dawn to greet the first sunrise Hatsuin Ode. It is an act of quiet hope, standing outside in the chill, watching the sun rise over mist-covered hills or distant ocean if you're near the coast. Children are given gifts of money in small silk pouches at Toshi demand. Special foods are prepared and arranged in lacquered boxes. Each food has symbolic meaning. Black beans for health, dried sardines for a bountiful harvest, mochi for strength and longevity. The peasant's New Year is a blend of Buddhist, Shinto, and deeply local traditions. Villagers might visit the local shrine, ring the great bell to drive away misfortune, and offer their first prayers of the year. Despite their lowly status in the social order, they find dignity and meaning in these rituals. It is a way of saying, we endure and we begin again. In the heat of midsummer, another festival arrives, not with drums and fire, but with bamboo and silent hopes. Tanabata, the Star Festival, tells of two lovers Ariheim and Hikobushis separated by the Milky Way, allowed to meet only once a year. Children and adults alike write their wishes on colorful strips of paper tanzaku and hang them from bamboo branches which sway gently in the night wind. Some wishes are practical: good harvest, health, fewer taxes. Others are quietly personal: love, luck, a child's well-being. The story of Tanabata is not one of triumph but of waiting, patience, and longing, a kind of cosmic endurance. For peasants who lived their lives by repetition and necessity, it offered a rare space for dreaming. You might tie your wish to the bamboo and wonder, just for a moment, if the stars above are watching. Just for a night, the sky becomes a storyteller. Outside of the major festivals, a quieter magic hums through daily life. The Japanese countryside, with its thick forests, craggy mountains, and winding rivers, is alive with present spirits called kami, who dwell in rocks, trees, waterfalls, and even fields of rice. You do not challenge the spirits, you live alongside them. If a tree grows in a strange shape, you bow when passing it. If a boulder rests in the middle of a path, you do not move it. Perhaps it is sacred. Perhaps it watches. There are gods of harvest and gods of sickness, guardian deities of crossroads and silent protectors of homes. Small shrines appear in the most ordinary places, the foot of a hill, beside a stream, or even tucked into the eaves of a peasant's thatched roof. These shrines might be no larger than a wooden box, but offerings are left: a scoop of rice, a string of dried fish, a flower, a coin. Stories too are told around the hearth. Ghost stories are common Kaden, but not for frights. They are lessons in humility, kindness, and respect for the unseen. a samurai who ignored a warning and was haunted by a spirit, a traveler who failed to bow to a roadside statue and became lost for days, a merchant who cheated his neighbor and was followed by a ghostly sound. In this world, the invisible is never far. The life of a peasant is ruled by nature, but not only for farming. Each season brings with it a host of minor festivals and observances. In spring, plum blossoms are the first sign that winter's hold is loosening. Plum trees are less showy than cherry blossoms, but just as cherished. Villagers walk among them, breathe in their faint perfume, and share small dishes of pickled vegetables beneath the branches. Cherry blossoms follow soon after sakura delicate and while modern hanami picnics are associated with the wealthy or urban, peasants, too, admired the fleeting bloom. A walk through the blossoms was not luxury, it was a reminder of impermanence, a central truth in both Buddhist and native beliefs. Autumn, the Tsukimi or moon viewing festival, brings families outside to gaze at the full moon. Offerings of dumplings and pampas grass are placed on small tables. The moon is not simply an object in the sky, is a source of stories, a symbol of cycles, a reminder that even in the darkness, beauty endures. As the 19th century began to unfold across the layered countryside of Japan, there was little to suggest that the calm and deeply ritualized rhythms of Edo society would be so violently appended. Yet beneath the lacquered order of rice collection, bowed heads, and official seals, something had begun to stir. The empire of the Tokugawa shogunate's scope, rigid in structure, was beginning to show signs of quiet but undeniable fracture. For more than 2 centuries, Japan had lived under the Pax Tokugawa, a peace held together by policy, paranoia, and protocol. The castle towns were bustling. The roads, particularly the Tokaido, bore a steady march of pilgrims, officials, and merchants. The temples received their daily offerings. The peasants, in their straw sandals and patched clothing, bowed to the village headman and offered their due. Everything seemed as it should be. But famine is no respecter of hierarchy. The early 1800s brought a series of poor harvests, and with them, the unmistakable sense that the gods had turned their gaze elsewhere. Villages that once rang with chant of planting songs fell silent under the weight of hunger. Rice, the sacred grain, the foundation of life and tax alike, withered in parched paddies or drowned in flooded ones. When the rains failed, when the winters froze too long, it was not the elite who went without, but the peasants who quietly disappeared, lost to starvation, disease, or desperate flight. It is in these long winters of emptiness that a slow revolution takes root, not in battle cries or banners, but in the rustling of feet leaving the village under cover of night, in the refusal to hand over rice to the tax officials, in the whispered planning of small bands of farmers, once loyal to the rule, of the bakufu now too hungry to care. These were not revolutions in the dramatic sense. They were not fought with swords drawn in palace halls. They were moments of rupture stitched together in homes and huts, across towns and rice fields. The peasant uprisings of the late Edo period, called Iki, often started as negotiations, or even supplications, a plea for tax relief, a complaint against a corrupt official. But when ignored, these petitions turned to protest. Storehouses were raided, tax records were burned, officials were driven from their posts. The tempo crisis of the 1830s stands as a testament to this growing instability. Following several successive crop failures, prices soared while incomes plummeted. The government attempted to rein in corruption and economic speculation, but its measures, like all those birthed from desperation, only added to the suffering. Townspeople rioted. Rural communities erupted in protest. Even samurai, many of them underpaid or financially ruined by the shogunate's inflexibility, found themselves drifting from traditional loyalty. The old structures of power, designed for control in times of plenty, were ill-equipped for famine, and in the face of rising discontent, the Tokugawa regime clung to protocol, enforcing more restrictions instead of offering reform. It was, perhaps, the beginning of the end. And then, across the sea, came the Black Ships in 1853. Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy arrived in Edo Bay with a fleet of steam-powered warships that belched black smoke and bore cannons, more terrible than anything the island nation had seen. Japan, long isolated under the Sukoku policy, closed to most foreign contact for over 200 years, suddenly faced a demand it could not ignore. "Open your ports," the Americans said. "Trade with us, or be made to." The arrival of Perry's fleet shocked the Tokugawa shogunate to its core. The illusion of security, carefully crafted over centuries, could not withstand the presence of modern weaponry. After centuries of isolation, the outside world had returned, and it was not knocking, it was breaking down the gates. Faced with the threat of bombardment and the technological superiority of Western powers, the shogunate capitulated. Treaties were signed, ports were opened, foreigners arrived, merchants, missionaries, diplomats, and with them came new ideas, strange fashions, unfamiliar diseases, and a sense of inevitability. For the samurai class, this was a humiliation. Their role as protectors, already largely ceremonial in the long peace of Tokugawa rule, was now made redundant by modern firepower. Their stipends, once reliable, began to dry up as economic pressures mounted. Some took to farming, others turned to teaching. A few became revolutionaries. Peasants, too, found themselves caught in the storm of transformation. The rigid forter, class system samurai, farmers, artisans, merchants began to dissolve as new economic opportunities and crises scrambled the social order. Some former peasants moved to cities, working in new factories or taking up trades once denied to them. Others stayed behind, watching as the lands they once tilled were absorbed into a rapidly industrializing economy. The Meiji Restoration in 1868 marked the official end of the Tokugawa shogunate. Emperor Meiji was restored to power symbolically at first, and with him came a torrent of reform. The domains were abolished. The samurai were stripped of their privileges. Conscription replaced the warrior class. Land taxes were monetized. Railroads were built. Japan hurtled into modernity with breathtaking speed. And yet, as the new Japan rose from the ashes of the old, many were left behind. The peasant who had spent his life bent over rice stalks was now told to pay taxes in coin, not grain, a task made harder by volatile markets and dishonest money. The artisan who had inherited centuries of craftsmanship found his trade displaced by factory goods. The former samurai, now ronin in all but name, wandered the edges of society. Stripped of identity, the Edo period had been flawed, often unjust, deeply hierarchical, but it had been stable, predictable, and for those at the bottom of the social order, even that predictability was a kind of comfort. Now, in the bright glare of the Meiji era, all was uncertain. In remote villages, where time still moved to the rhythm of the seasons, the old ways lingered. Festivals continued. Folk tales were told. Rice was planted. And yet, the world beyond those fields had changed, beyond recognition. There were trains now, and telegraphs. Foreigners walking the streets of Yokohama, factories billowing smoke into the once pristine sky, and somewhere, deep in the heart of those who had lived through the shift, there was a mourning for the quiet tyranny they had known, and the chaotic freedom they now faced. The fall of the old order was not one moment, but many a long, slow crumble beneath the weight of its own rigidity. And as the structures of feudal life collapsed, they left behind not only relics and ruins, but the memories of those who had upheld them with bowed heads and calloused hands. This was the end of Edo, not with a bang, but a breath, a sigh carried. Across rice paddies, temple bells, and the soft shuffle of sandals on stone, the old world, with all its burdens and its rhythms, had passed, and in its place, a new Japan stirred restless, uncertain, and awake.